Cersei Lannister is a paranoid chaos gremlin who stumbles from one easily avoidable mistake to the next until she is finally crushed under the weight of her own stupidity. Now, if you're a show-only person, you might be going, no, not my Cersei, she's a great player of the Game of Thrones, and to that I would say no, she's not. Cersei is kind of a unicorn when it comes to the Game of Thrones TV show because she is one of the only female characters who doesn't get dumbed down in their adaptation. She gets smartened up, but it's bad. It's not in a good way. So kind of how this comment is talking about, Cersei gets changed a lot if going from book to screen, and a lot of that has to do with basically how her actions are framed within the story. And it's interesting because within the context of the show, for the most part, her actions are almost always framed in a pretty generous way where, like, she is decisive, she's ruthless, she has a plan, and she's trying to make moves, and sometimes they go well and sometimes they don't. And this characterization goes along with my theory that D&D the showrunners basically reward violence with a more generous portrayal on screen. So they see Cersei and her ruthlessness and her willingness to make these big chaotic moves as like proof of like, oh, she's a good player of the game, when in actuality she really isn't. The Cersei of the books is ruled by two basic concepts, her vanity and her paranoia. Her vanity, of course, stems from her upbringing. She had a very entitled upbringing. She was always like set up for these very big positions, these very big moves. Like her father, Tywin, originally wanted to marry her to Rhaegar Targaryen. She was going to be the queen. And then when that didn't happen, other moves were made. Eventually she was married off to Robert. She was always brought up with the idea that she was going to be special, she was going to be important. But simultaneously, along with that, because of her gender, she was stifled. She was not allowed a lot of autonomy. So we have these two like conflicting things going on in her head. The idea that like she is special, she is smart, she is good, which is why she is getting all these like cool positions and being set up for these positions, but compounded with I lack agency, they won't let me make decisions because of my gender, and that is frustrating. And this frustration eventually evolves into paranoia and becomes one of the dominant motivators for her. Now, as you can probably see where I'm going, the combination of insane pride and paranoia it's not good. It's not good. It doesn't lead to smart, helpful decisions. And that is best illustrated in the fourth book, A Feast for Crows, where we finally get point of view chapters from Cersei herself. Obviously, spoilers about that book from here on. You can skip, it's fine. Real quick though, prior to her own POV chapters, we only see her through other people's point of view, mainly Sansa and Tyrion. And the thing about them is they view her as generally kind of scary. She's very ruthless. She's very willing to, enact violence or scheme or do something to get what she wants. And so I can see like how, from another person's point of view, okay, like that's just who she is. Tyrion does think she's kind of dumb and easy to manipulate, which is true, but like, again, conflicting point of views, maybe he was wrong. He wasn't. But finally, when we get her point of view in A Feast for Crows, the first thing you realize is that she is batty. She is gone. Her brain, it is scrambled eggs because she is so paranoid at all hours of the day. She sees enemies, she sees perceived wrongs around every corner. And George does a fabulous job of portraying this in the books because something that I think he does really well is he gives like every different point of view kind of a different flavor depending on the person. Like maybe they have a lot of internal dialogue, maybe they like describe the scenery a bit more, maybe they ruminate on their past. Like they all have like different things that make them kind of unique, and Cersei is her incessant, constant internal monologue. She is constantly talking to herself as scenes are going on. Like she's talking to people and like maybe she's responding every so often out loud, but in her head there is like a train of thought dialogue, and it's all like in italics. She's just going on being like, this person's trying to get me, they're crazy, oh, they think they're smarter than me, they're not smarter than me, I'm a lioness of the rock, how dare they, I am Tywin's daughter, they don't know. Meanwhile, I'm reading going like, oh, okay, oh ma'am, oh, let's take a breather, you don't seem well. And she's not, because she's not well. Her brain, like, she is so fucked up because her pride and her paranoia are in such conflict all the time that she knows no rest. Her brain is a mess at all times, and she's constantly trying to control the situation so that she feels that sense of security that she's never gonna get. So in A Feast for Crows, it's horrible because this is the aftermath of Tywin's death, and this is her moment. This is her moment to shine. She can be in charge now, and because of that, because she's finally in charge after, being set up for all of the amazing things, and now no one's in her way. She can do whatever she wants. But she's never actually been prepared for any of this. So she starts making decisive moves, and they're all stupid. The small council she stacks with sycophants who are all kind of bumbling idiots of their own. She puts Qyburn there. She appoints a master of ships, this guy named Aurain Waters, who's just like a hot fuckboy, and he compliments her a lot. So she's like, oh yeah, he would be great at that. That'd be great. Because again, because of her paranoia, she perceives enemies everywhere. So she doesn't want to include any Tyrells on her council, even though that would be the smart thing to do since they are the Lannisters' closest allies at this point. And she's trying to, keep everyone at an arm's length and only surround herself with people who she feels like are valuing her or supporting her thoughts. But they are idiots if they're doing that, so what happens? Then seemingly the worst decision of all is she allows herself to be manipulated by the High Sparrow after he becomes High Septon into allowing them to reestablish the Faith Militant. And what's really interesting about this is in the show, they portray that scene as Cersei bringing up the idea of reinstating the Faith Militant, kind of with the eventual goal of ooh, if there's a militarized faith force, they'll lock up Loras and then lock up Marjorie, and that's how I'll win. That's how I'll get her out of the way, because again, the paranoia. Now, while that's kind of a dumb idea, it's not as stupid as what actually happens in the book. So in the books, the High Sparrow becomes appointed the High Septon because basically him and his followers overtake the Sept and strong arm their way into putting all of them in charge. And then he refuses to bless Tommen as the new king, which is super important because, the Faith of the Seventh is the main religion. So Cersei goes to him and is like, hey, we need you to do this. This is my son up there and you need to do that. So what do we got to do? And the High Septon is just like, ooh, I don't know what to do. It's very hard. People don't feel safe in the streets anymore. If only we had the Faith Militant again. And Cersei's like, oh, you want the Faith? Okay, yeah, that's fine, I guess, whatever. And he's like, oh, really? You'll allow that even though it's been outlawed for hundreds of years? And Cersei is like, yeah, it's fine. I don't care. And then in the internal monologue is like, yeah, I know it was outlawed a couple hundred years ago by one of the Targaryen kings. I don't remember why or when. It's fine. It's not fine, Cersei. You're... And then after that, her actual plan in the book to get Marjorie thrown in jail is to basically coerce a bunch of people into fabricating stories about her and her cousins fucking all these men. And Cersei, some of the people that she is convincing to do this are her side pieces themselves. So she sends them all to go lie and say, hey, this happened, so that they'll arrest Marjorie. That happens, but then the Faith Militant tortures these people to get real confessions out of them, and then they all are like, no, it was Cersei, I swear. And that's when Cersei gets arrested in the books. So it's not just oh, I put the wrong person in a position of power and now it's bit me in the butt. Oh no, she allowed hundreds of years of precedent stopping this dangerous military force from existing again to be poofed because she got tricked by this old man because she was too impatient and didn't want Tommen to have to come down to the Sept for his blessing. And then she tries to get Marjorie thrown in jail with a ridiculous scheme that is so convoluted and easily gets figured out. And now at this point, she has created a military force that is empowered to do just this, grab her and throw her in jail instead of Marjorie, or with Marjorie at the same time. And I didn't even get to the fact that she thinks that Tyrion is literally hiding in the walls the entire time. That's a part 2. If you guys want that, please let me know. Okay, goodbye. Cersei Lannister is a Delulu tornado of paranoia whose brain has gone fully mushy bananas. Part 2, Electric Boogaloo. In Part 2, I promised to talk about Cersei's paranoia, specifically the seeds of that paranoia and how they eventually manifest into her thinking that Tyrion is literally hiding in the walls of King's Landing. But before that, we do need to rewind a little bit back to her childhood so that we can set this up. The following will contain spoilers that date back to the Bush administration. You've been warned. In the comments of my previous video, lots of people mentioned Maggy the Frog and the prophecy that Cersei got when she's a child. So let's talk about that and how that feeds into her paranoia. I promise I didn't forget. So in both the show and the books, you learn that Cersei had a prophecy given to her by a woods witch named Maggy the Frog back when Cersei was a child living in Casterly Rock. And that woods witch gave her basically a two-part prophecy, both of which you get in the books, but only half of it appears in the show. So the first part of the prophecy, Cersei asks if she will marry the prince, meaning is she going to marry Rhaegar Targaryen, who is the prince that Tywin has been trying to set her up with. And Maggy the Frog says, no, you will not wed the prince, you will wed the king. And she's like, okay, how many kids will I have? And Maggy the Frog says, I think, you will have 3 and the king will have like 17 or something. She's confused. And then gold will be their crowns, gold will be their shrouds. So golden hair, golden shroud. You know, when you die, you have a shroud put on you. It's very sad. So that's the part that you get in the show, but the book, there is a second half of that prophecy, and that is that Cersei is going to be killed by the Valonqar. The Valonqar is, I think it's a Valyrian word, I might be wrong, correct me in the comments if I'm wrong, but it means little brother. So because Cersei thinks that she's the brightest kid who's ever existed, she immediately goes, oh, that's Tyrion. Tyrion is the one who's going to kill me, and this is the source of her hatred of Tyrion for the rest of her life. Like, yes, obviously, losing her mother during Tyrion's birth is also another source of her anger, but specifically, she is terrified that Tyrion is going to kill her, and so naturally she hates him, she's mean to him, she tortures him, which is a weird thing to do, because, you know, you're kind of setting up someone to not like you, and you've been prophesized to be murdered by a little brother, whatever. But as the rest of us can probably put together in our heads, because we have a couple of brain cells to rub together, Cersei has more than one little brother, because technically Jaime is her little brother as well. He's her twin, but he came out second. So the Valonqar prophecy could, you know, apply to him as much as it applies to Tyrion, but we don't know yet. Guess we'll see. Again, I assume in the books it's not going to be a rocks fall and everyone dies death. I assume the Valonqar is actually going to have something to do with it. Weird, I know. But anyway, so this prophecy that she gets told at a very young age begins to really inform all of her decisions going forward, and becomes the source of her paranoia. Because, again, she has been told a future that she doesn't like, and so she's going to actively try to fight it, while at the same time growing up in a society that does not allow her the agency to kind of like do that to her full capacity. Now, I would probably argue that trying to actively fight against a prophecy is never going to be good. I don't think it ever goes well in this universe, and if anything, it's going to make the bad thing happen in the worst possible way, versus like, oh, I don't know how that'll work, that prophecy will work out, like maybe I'm misinterpreting it, but no, if you're actively trying to fuck with it, it's going to come out bad, I just assume. So smash cut to the present day, Cersei is now in charge in the aftermath of Tywin's death. Tywin is gone, and Cersei is Queen Regent. She, without a hand who can control her, and, you know, as I talked about in the last video, she starts going kind of buck wild. She's making all these decisions, she's making all these moves, partially from a place of like, oh, I finally have the autonomy, I finally have the ability to control things, I can actively fight this prophecy and like try to position myself and position my kids, who are my legacy, in like the best possible way. But, you know, Cersei is not so good up here, so the choices she's making to try to do that are not doing that, and in fact are probably what's ultimately leading to the deaths of her children and then eventually her. But anyway, at the present, you know, she's all gung-ho, but because like she's finally in control, the paranoia is also growing. Because like now that she has control, she's terrified of losing again. She's terrified of making the wrong move that will ultimately lead to her demise, especially now since she is fully in control. And so this leads to all these assumptions that she's making and all these delusions that she's putting on herself. My favorite being, of course, that Tyrion is in the walls, man. He's in the walls! Cersei, what the fuck is wrong with you? My god. So the Tyrion is in the walls delusion kind of starts from a place of logic. So Feast for Crows opens directly in the aftermath of Tyrion killing Tywin in the Tower of the Hand. So they find Tywin's body, they're searching the castle for Tyrion, Cersei and Jaime are awakened, and she is like distraught, she's angry, she's rageful, especially because it's Tyrion who did this. The person that she has never trusted, that she thinks is going to lead to her ultimate death, he has now killed their father, and seemingly left them exposed. And then specifically, the way Tyrion was able to kill their father was by using one of the secret passageways in Maegor's Holdfast, which is like the center of the Red Keep, that like central castle. He's been able to use one of the secret passageways to get into the Tower of the Hand, where he murdered Tywin. So immediately, Cersei is like, okay, everyone, search the castle, search the dungeons, follow the secret passage, we gotta find him, we gotta find Tyrion! And naturally, because Tyrion's on a boat now, they don't find Tyrion. So now Cersei's freaking out. She thinks the Valonqar is on the loose. He's probably after her. He's probably after Tommen, and he's using the secret passageways in the castle to move around. Because obviously he wouldn't flee from King's Landing. He'll stay here. And he'll just be moving around. He'll just be like sneaking around, looking around corners and stuff. Because this is where Cersei's mind is at the moment. And her fear that Tyrion is still nearby leads her to do crazy shit. So something that doesn't happen in the show, but does happen in the books. Cersei has the High Septon of the Faith killed, because Tyrion was the one who like helped replace the previous High Septon. So the current one is like a Tyrion appointee, basically. So she's like, oh, he's one of Tyrion's guys, so we gotta get rid of him, and then we'll put our own in, okay? We'll put our own in. But the problem with that is that killing the new guy leads to a new election, and that's when all the sparrows come into the city, and they strong-arm that election so that the High Sparrow is put in place, and the people that she thought would be the next High Septons are now being punished and forced to do manual labor in the Sept. And then the pièce de résistance with the whole Tyrion is in the walls thing. Cersei is so scared that Tyrion is still hanging around the Tower of the Hand that she decides to blow it up. Specifically, she is going to burn it to the ground during Tommen's wedding. Kind of like fireworks? So after Tommen is married to Marjorie, which, you know, Cersei is furious about, but that had been like brokered before Tywin had died, so it was like happening now. So in the aftermath of the wedding, as part of the celebration, Cersei has the pyromancers basically cover the Tower of the Hand in wildfire, and then they light it ablaze. And all the crowds after Tommen's wedding get to watch. And Cersei is at her most unhinged watching this, because she's watching like the Tower of the Hand go up until it's like burned and like collapsing and stuff, because, you know, the wildfire burns so hot, and she just like in her internal monologue is like, yes, Tyrion's not going to be able to do anything now, because Tyrion's either dead or he's far away, and I burned his secret passageways. Mwahaha, I am so smart, I am a lioness of the rock, I am Tywin Lannister's daughter. Cersei, please calm down. So the moral of the story is that Cersei is so paranoid, so delusional, so scared for her life and the life of her child, that she literally thinks her little dwarf brother is just scurrying around the secret passageways of the castle, and she doesn't feel safe in her room, and she's going to and she feels like she needs to burn down chunks of the castle to become safe from him, because we need to knock down the walls, man. We gotta figure it out, because he's in the walls. I have now made 2 9-minute plus videos on Cersei and her craziness, and I feel like I still haven't talked about everything. If there's anything else from this you want me to talk about, please let me know in the comments. I probably won't get to it immediately, but I'll get to it. Okay, goodbye. Cersei and Jaime Lannister's interests include doing the do incest style in a decaying tower and pushing children out of windows. But what if I told you it has nothing to do with their, crappy upbringing by a literal sociopath, and everything to do with their secret Targaryen genes? Yes, because what this series needs is more secret Targaryens. The series would be better if everyone was a secret Targaryen. You know what? I need to calm down. Welcome to my new segment, Theory Thursdays, where we will explore the dangers of there being a 13-year time gap between novels. Now, despite my biases showing, the whole Cersei and Jaime Jaime are secret Targaryens, or specifically the secret Targaryen children of Aerys Targaryen, the Mad King, has been a theory that has been floating around the internet for years and is very popular. People love this theory. And even if I'm not one of those people, we're still gonna have fun, because what are 2 more secret Targaryens? Yeah, it's fun. Whimsy. We're going for whimsy here. So the whole Cersei and Jaime are secret Targaryens has several pieces of evidence that let's go over. The first one, unfortunately, has to do with Aerys, who, on top of being crazy and a murderer and enjoying, the burning of people, is also just a grade A creep. His bedroom proclivities are not great. He is described as being very abusive towards his wife specifically. But beyond that, he's also just, kind of a lecher, because we have to use the old-timey words here. And we know this because he had this weird obsession with their mother, Joanna Lannister. Because back in the day, you have to remember that Aerys and Tywin were like besties. They're real good friends, before Aerys had gone all, loopy bananas. So, yeah, they knew each other. Tywin married Joanna, but it was said that Aerys, having a thing for Joanna, took some liberties during the bedding. Now, the bedding, remember, in this, medieval setting is, on the wedding night. Basically, there is an audience for the consummation of the wedding. And I'm not saying you can't have lots of people in the room, but, if they're not involved and you're related to them, maybe not so much. But as part of the bedding, typically what will happen is, all of the noble women will undress the dude, and all of the noble men will help undress the lady, and then they, push them into bed and do the do, and oh, yep, it happened, we can all verify. And Aerys seemingly got a little handsier than he should have. Now, the last time I talked about this months ago, there was some confusion in the comments where people thought that, because I was talking about the Tyrion being a secret Targaryen, because, again, that's also a thing. They're all secret. But anyway, when I mentioned this detail, people assumed that meant that, Jaime and Cersei were conceived by Aerys, with Joanna that night. That is not what I'm saying. I'm saying that it is evidence to an unfortunate dynamic. And so if we know that he was interested in her in that way, and that it made everyone uncomfortable, who's to say that it didn't happen again? And we do know, timeline-wise, that at some point, Joanna Lannister was sent back to Casterly Rock away from King's Landing, the Red Keep, because Aerys was, being Aerys. So there is the potential that, if we know that Aerys was interested in Joanna, that, some things may have happened that probably weren't great, and the result was when she got pregnant, they were actually Aerys's kids and not Tywin's. Now, beyond those breadcrumbs leading to this theory, the other big one that I think people point to even a little bit more is Cersei's behavior just in general. Because remember, even more so in the books, Cersei is slowly losing her marbles. She is truly going legitimately insane. Her paranoia is growing and growing, getting off the charts, and she is developing a very interesting obsession with wildfire. And these are important details because, as we know from Jaime's POV as he's watching this happen, this reminds him a lot of the Mad King. Because that was his whole deal. Aerys, wasn't always as crazy as he was towards the end. It was a slow buildup of the paranoia getting worse and worse, and him getting further and further delusional, and then matching that with this sadistic streak that also manifested in an obsession with wildfire, which Cersei is showing a lot of interest in. So it really feels like we are getting set up for a Mad Queen arc from someone who would actually make sense. I'm not going to get sidetracked. But if she is turning into the Mad Queen with, these signs that are so reminiscent of Ares, is it because she's literally his daughter? And then you combine all of that, the interest in Joanna, her acting just like him, and then our third and most obvious one that I haven't mentioned, their interest in each other. It's very Targaryen coded. So for the people who love this theory, I will give you, I think there is enough evidence. All the pieces are there, and if you put them in this order, I see the picture that you're painting. I acknowledge this. But like with most theories, the place that I'm gonna get, stuck in the mud because I'm just a stinker like that is, what does it do for the overall story? And this is ultimately why I just don't think it's a thing. Because yes, there are pieces of the puzzle that fit together and create a picture that I understand, but think bigger than that. What does this do for their individual arcs in the story and for the overall story itself? Because their current behavior already has explanations, okay? Like, their unhealthy dynamic with each other, has its roots in their horrible upbringing. Tywin did a bad job of raising these two, once his wife unfortunately died. It's a black mark against him. He created, the people here for better or worse. We don't need a genetic explanation for Cersei going cuckoo. We see the steps, we understand how she can get from point A to point B. This is a person raised with immense privilege, but also with these like horrible restrictions on her because of her gender, and forcing her to act as freaking cattle almost, selling her to Robert, like not selling her, but like basically like she's being forced to marry someone. She doesn't have a choice in it. What is that? It's not voluntary. There's no consent. So you start off with that disconnect, the tension that creates between the privilege and the constrictions, and that's gonna cause lots of issues here. So the second that she is freed from that, she is not freed of her trauma though, and so it's going to manifest and in scary ways. Sorry, I'm not being super eloquent right now. And finally, the argument that I use basically every time I talk about one of the Lannisters being a potential Targaryen is I think it messes with the idea of like their relationship to Tywin, because all three of Tywin's children are a reflection of his poor parenting. Because all of his kids could have been super intelligent, bright, well-adjusted people who are very skilled in their particular way, but it is Tywin who messes them all up. Tyrion is Tywin writ small. He has the potential to be like a mover and a shaker just like Tywin if Tywin wouldn't, irrationally hate him. Cersei, if she was treated with an ounce of respect from the get-go, might not have, felt this urge, this neediness that causes her to do like all this crazy stuff later the second that she does have agency. Jaime, Jaime might not be the cynical prick that he became. He might not have, ever been forced into the Kingsguard as a pawn of like Aerys and Tywin fighting over each other if, Tywin had just been a little better. So really, I think the person who it would affect the most to have, not be his children would be Tywin. If these two were actually heiresses, Tywin is the one who would, I think, feel the brunt of that, because that would just leave Tyrion. And I do think that there's like a certain delicious irony to that, but Tywin's not around anymore. He's not here to be the one person who that payoff might be interesting to see. And I know there's going to be people in the comments who are like, oh, Ronnie, you just like to poo-poo on theories. But I don't hate all theories. There are theories that I fully believe. Varys is obviously a mermaid, duh. But I just don't see the narrative point of this one being real. And this is my just general thing with theories is the reason I think I'm not really much of a theorist is because I feel like most theorists are looking for the tiny details, the tiny pieces of the puzzle that they could put together and then make a picture out of. And I'm just not focusing on those things. I am looking at overall arcs from these characters, how they intersect and how they are acting with each other to create the full narrative. That's just where my mind goes, and so yeah, I don't see what this does for the story, but it's fine. It's fun. We can have fun. I get it. And please, in the comments, if you could leave me any other theories that you want to talk about, hopefully ones that I haven't done so far, but I'm going to be doing, Theory Thursday every week, and we will talk about a different one. So yeah, have a great day. Okay, bye. Game of Thrones Season 6, Episode 10, The Winds of Winter, oof, that name hurts, is the second highest rated episode of Game of Thrones on IMDb, and for a lot of people, is their favorite episode. I even counted myself in that group until I, stopped and thought about it for 2 seconds and went, wait, none of this episode actually makes any sense. Albeit it took me a few years reading the book and realizing that, oh, none of the logic of this episode is logicking. Really though, if you pause and think about the huge plot points from this episode and think of how does this logically make sense within the grander scheme of the story, there's some big holes all of a sudden. The big one, of course, being the blowing up of the Sept by yours truly over there. Because if we remember, Cersei is trying to avoid her trial by combat. She does not want to go have this trial. She knows she's going to lose. She knows she's going to be back in the clutches of the Faith Militant and the High Sparrow. So she's going to do everything that she can to avoid this. Naturally, that includes blowing up the Vatican, but fantasy. Before anyone jumps down my throat, I'm not arguing that Cersei isn't crazy enough to, try to pull something like this. I would say I think she's only crazy enough to do it in the book. The show, I don't think, sets her up with the same degree, but I will digress. But it's not so much that Cersei blows it up that I have an issue with, but the aftermath of it. Because Cersei blows up the Sept of Baelor with, a couple of the largest families in the kingdom inside of it, as well as the High Septon and a lot of the Faith Militant, and then isn't punished for it. No. In fact, she isn't punished at all. She gets to crown herself queen. And I'm sorry, but as cool as this moment is, and as hard as that soundtrack hits, believe me, it does not make sense. Because say that Cersei did blow up the Sept of Baelor, which hasn't happened in the books, but, maybe it will. But if she did that, she would not be rewarded for it, not at all. And there is no, feasible way that she would be able to crown herself in the aftermath of it. Because remember the context of which this is all happening, at the time. The Faith Militant is resurgent in the country. The High Sparrow has ascended to the rank of High Septon. He is in charge of the Faith of the Seventh, the largest and most common faith in all of Westeros. And because of that, because of this particular High Septon's religious zeal, there is a revival of a very conservative religious fervor in the country. The fact that the Faith Militant exists at all is crazy and, a sign of this, gaining of steam from this, very, very extreme religious movement that has basically infiltrated the regular Faith of the Seven, which at this point had become, a little corrupt, a little, underhanded, you scratch my back, I scratch yours. But all of that's gone now because they have cleansed it of everything. So if this is the current environment that the events of the show and, the books are taking place within, there's, a lot of crazy religious fervor in the streets. And if someone were to attack the faith, they would be seen as an enemy. Because remember, Cersei is not ruling, if she were to rule, over an empty city. She is ruling a giant city, one of the biggest in Westeros, with millions of people in it who are all, for lack of a better word, poor, uneducated, and extremely devout religious people. And uprisings in King's Landing are not a new thing. They happen. They happen with some frequency. So say if there was a crazy person who went ahead and blew up the biggest symbol of their religion, their direct connection to their very real gods, I don't think the majority of the population would be chill with that. So say after, Cersei has blown up the Tyrells, religion itself, and whoever and whatever else was in there, say after all of that, yeah, she has enough Lannister troops who are loyal to her to somehow, crown herself queen, even though there is no precedent for her to do that. She, has no right to the throne at all. And, if you want to claim it's conquest, okay, well, let's see how long you hold it. Because again, if she had the troops to be able to accomplish the bit of putting the crown on her head, cool. The entire city is now going to rise up against you, and you don't have enough troops, even with all of the Lannister guards, household guard, whatever. Even if you have some of their army there, that and the city watch isn't going to be enough if the entire populace of King's Landing is rising up. Not to mention, if one person randomly, blew up the fantasy Vatican and then took the throne, all of the other regions, in the country would freak out and target her specifically. Which a lot of them do in the show. I will give them, we have a lot of people suddenly go over to Daenerys, and that makes some logical sense, but, we don't get everyone. The Stormlands, the Crownlands, the Vale, none of them would be chill with this. But seemingly, because Cersei exists in a vacuum and rules over, an empty city, she's able to crown herself just because she felt like it. And then beyond the whole, Sept and Cersei mess, we have Dany finally leaving Meereen and heading to Westeros, except, but you didn't complete your mission. Because remember, at this point, Dany has stayed there. She has stayed there as long as she has because her greatest concern, which I think is actually her real greatest concern, is slavery and her desire to abolish it. And that's why, she gets stuck in Slaver's Bay for so long, is because, she goes from city to city, frees a bunch of these people, and then realizes that the systems set up around them are just going to put them back into slavery the second that she is gone. And so that is why she's there. She's trying to figure out, how do I keep these people safe because these are the people that I actually care about. But in the show, it's like, oh no, well, she kills like the current group of bad guys who were there, and she institutes like another like council or whatever, leaves the second sons to take care of everything. Which, sure, like the mercenary group, they're gonna be like good leaders, cool. And even if there's like a council outside of that, that's what she did in Astapor, and it got overthrown immediately. So essentially, Dany just leaves Meereen because she gets bored of it, which I know if you don't like Dany in the TV show, you're like, yeah, that logic makes sense, but it doesn't, because she has drives, she has goals, and she has stayed there for multiple seasons for a very specific one that she suddenly just forgets about because, ooh, the pointy chair is calling to me. I can also go into all of this mess and how they, did some big reveals, even though they didn't get revealed to the person who it actually mattered to, and then a lot of the implications of it are never really, like, fully explored again. Prince who was promised, Azor Ahai, no, we don't care. Okay, cool. But my general point is, there are a lot of incredible set pieces in this episode, which spectacle-wise are mind-blowing. I remember watching this and, like, losing my shit. I thought this was incredible. This was, like, the coolest thing I've ever seen. People, all the backstabbing, all the deaths, all happening so quickly and successively in one episode. Oh, it's too much. But the thing when you have those huge set pieces, those big deaths, is they have implications. There is a chain of events, there's a butterfly effect that happens from when you do that, which is the entire point of A Song of Ice and Fire of Game of Thrones. Think back to the early seasons. The big important deaths are what, caused all of the events of the series to happen. Robert dying, before him, the Mad King, after the Red Wedding. All of these things have butterfly effects that have huge ramifications going forward. And this episode has the giant deaths, has the huge, scene-changing things, and none of them affect Jack squat. But hey, the soundtrack slaps. Okay, bye. Cersei Lannister's legacy in the public zeitgeist is an obsession with elephants, and that is absolutely insane to me. This character, who was utterly terrifying and badass in the TV show, who was insane, out of her mind, a paranoid lunatic in the books, has been reduced, has been brought down to being obsessed with motherfucking Dumbo over here. One of the greatest TV villains of all time, who, need I not remind you, died by a rock fall on head. The lady who said power is power, she died because brick went boom. But even in her rock-induced slumber, she doesn't even get rest. No, she doesn't get rest, and she doesn't even get to be known for that stupid plot point. She has to be remembered for a single episode where she was obsessed with motherfucking elephants for reasons. And don't get me wrong, the memes are memeing. This is fucking hilarious right here. I love it, but it's mind-boggling to me as someone who was obsessed with this character, who remains obsessed with this character. My obsession with this character is renewed now that I've read the books, but having been so obsessed, to see what she was reduced to in television is insane. Dumbo? Cersei Lannister has been a paranoid hot mess her entire life because from a very young age she made the unfortunate mistake of trying to mess with prophecy and learning what happens when you do so. I'm of course talking about the prophecies of Maggy the Frog, the sorceress, the woods witch that Cersei would go and visit as a child to learn about her future and promptly not like what she heard. Now, Game of Thrones showed us this scene. It was the first flashback that they ever did, but unfortunately, they cut out some very key information from the prophecies that Maggy gives to Cersei, which inevitably explains all of Cersei's craziness. It explains her paranoia, her hatred of Tyrion, just her general disdain for all other younger women. It's a doozy. So allow me to tell you what you missed. So the first thing to understand is that Maggy the Frog is the real deal. She is a sorceress. She is from Essos. Her husband was some sort of a traitor and stopped by Lannisport with her when they were both, young and very beautiful, and they ended up setting up camp in Lannisport. Also, I should point out that Maggy is not actually her real name. Maggy is the Westerosi's attempt at pronouncing the term, I'm going to say it's called Maggi, so M-A-E-G-I. So like a Magi, sometimes it's pronounced Magi, Maggy, whatever. She became very popular because, as I said, she is the real deal. So people would come to her for spells, potions, etc., and she would provide for some, monetary compensation. Now, how do I know that she's the real deal? Well, I will skip ahead just ever so slightly and say that when the young girls, go to the tent to have their future read by Maggy the Frog asks them for a taste of their blood. And it's through that taste of their blood that she is able to share with them the events of their futures. And this, of course, is blood magic, which is a very legitimate, real type of magic. She is not putting on an act. She is literally using their blood to, like, see into the future. But I'm, of course, getting a little ahead of myself, so let's rewind. Why is Cersei here? What's going on? And what happens? So by this point, Cersei is kind of on her own. Jaime has been separated from her because they were caught canoodling as young children. And so Jaime was sent off to, like, go do the boy shit. And then Cersei is just bored at home, essentially. But because they don't want her to be alone, they try to give her, like, these companions. I'm not going to call them friends because she doesn't actually like any of them. But basically, they're like bedmates. It's just like, oh, I don't want to sleep alone because that's scary and it's cold. So just like two friends in a platonic way, they sleep in a bed. Also, they're children. You get it. It's sleepover time. But again, Cersei doesn't like any of them because Cersei doesn't like anyone because she's Cersei. She always thought that they were, like, kind of like scheming, that they were jealous of her, that she basically couldn't trust them because they were all, like, out to get her. Again, very Cersei coded. But they decide one day that they want to go visit Maggy the Frog so that they can get their futures told to them as, like, a fun thing to do. The girls are a little, like, nervous, but Cersei is like, I don't care. Who the fuck is Maggy the Frog? What's she gonna do to me? So they get there. I believe they find Maggy asleep, and when they wake her up, one of the girls gets really terrified. Jane Farman, I believe. Jane runs out the door. Cersei judges her, as she is wont to do. But then the other companion does stay. Her name is Melara Heatherspoon. So it's at this point that Cersei says she wants her future read, and then Maggy asks for a drop of her blood, a taste of her blood. After Maggy gets a taste, she basically tells Cersei that she can ask her 3 questions about her future, and Maggy will answer. So Cersei's first question is, will I marry the prince? Because at this point, Cersei has been told her entire life that Tywin's plan is to marry her to Rhaegar Targaryen. He wasn't married as of yet, and so she asks, hey, can you confirm this? And then Maggy very cryptically says, you will not marry the prince, you will marry the king. Now, I think we know how that ended up working out. But Cersei's like, okay, cool, so will I get to be the queen? Question number 2, to which Maggy says, yes, you will get to be the queen, until someone younger and more beautiful comes to, cast you down. It's at this point that Cersei is getting less hyped for this fun little outing with the girls, because, hey, this isn't sounding very positive. Then she asks Maggy her third question, which is, will she and the king have children? To which Maggy once again very cryptically responds, yes, the king shall have 16 and you shall have 3. And Cersei at this point is just like, what? I think I know math, but this doesn't seem like it's mathing. Maggy doesn't stop there because she continues and says that Cersei will outlive all 3 of her children. Gold shall be their crowns and gold shall be their shrouds, like their funeral shrouds. Then she goes on again and says, and then when your tears have drowned you, the Valonqar will wrap his hands around your throat and choke the life from you. That is important. Now, I'll skip ahead for a second to say that later, Cersei would go to her septa and ask, what does Valonqar mean? And her septa would tell her that Valonqar is a High Valyrian word that means little brother. Now, please do not comment in the comments and tell me, like, well, actually, High Valyrian is a gender-neutral language. We don't know exactly how gender-neutral it is, okay? We know that some words are gender-neutral. We don't know that the language as a whole is gender-neutral. So as far as we know, in the text, we have been told that in High Valyrian, Valonqar means little brother. Okay? Got me fighting for my life out here sometimes. But anyway, at this point, Cersei is well and truly done. She's like, this bitch doesn't know what she's doing. She doesn't know what she's saying. I hate her. She's ugly. Her feet stank. I'm not here. I'm not here for it. But Melara Heatherspoon, bless her heart, goes, hey, I don't want to leave yet. I want my questions. And Cersei's like, I don't give a shit about your questions. I'm pissy. I want to go. But Melara ignores her, gives Maggy some of her blood, and manages to ask one question, which is, will she marry Jaime? You can imagine that Cersei did not appreciate that question. Maggy responds very ominously and says, no, not Jaime, nor any other man. The worms will have your maidenhead. Maidenhead being like virginity. So yeah, no one's gonna get it. You're gonna and she goes on, "Your death is here, little one. Can you smell her breath? She is close." It's at this point that Cersei loses her patience. I think she grabs like a nearby potion, throws it in Maggie's face, and they run from the tent, with Maggie like screaming curses and shit in a different language. So that's also probably not great. Now, from this day forward, Cersei is plagued by this. She dreams about it all the time. She's always panicked, not just for her children, which she does at least to some degree care about. Not quite like the show puts it out to be. It's a little more narcissistic, I think, in the books, but no, she's not only afraid for her children, she's afraid for her own life, and the fact that she thinks that her little brother is about to, try to off her. And then, of course, in her interpretation, she assumes that that little brother has to be Tyrion. And that's so important for the context of the show and makes me very frustrated that they cut that final line about the Valonqar because, this explains Cersei. This explains Cersei as a person. The way that she treats Tyrion, the way that she just like continually abuses him his entire life is because of this moment, because she does not trust him. If she wasn't already, biased against him because he's a dwarf, because he has like physical differences, she now well and truly thinks that this is a monster sent here to off her. And going forward, everything she does is trying to prevent the eventualities that she heard from the prophecy with Maggy the Frog. The very first thing that she takes care of, unfortunately, is Melara. Melara, who has now heard all about her future. Even young Cersei was like, I don't think I want you living that long. Because if you live that long, you could tell someone, and that would be a problem for me. So Melara has an unfortunate accident where she trips in a well and, stops breathing. And Cersei, when she is thinking back on this, while she doesn't actively think about the act itself, she does remember that when Melara went into the well, she was screaming. So Cersei really just being a sociopath from day one there, aren't ya? But even with Melara out of the way, she still worries about the eventualities, because eventually she realizes that parts of this prophecy are coming true. She doesn't marry the prince. Aerys, the Mad King, rejects that betrothal, much to Tywin's chagrin, and then eventually she would marry Robert, who was already the king, making her the queen. And now, every time a younger woman gets brought in, whether it's Sansa, whether it's Marjorie, she does not trust them. She actively hates them because she thinks this is the one showing up to take me out. And then with the passing of Joffrey, it's further confirmation. She thinks that Tyrion is responsible. Why? Well, Joffrey and Tyrion didn't get along, and oh, hey, there's a prophecy that Tyrion wants to off me. That makes sense. She's terrified of Tyrion, like, literally being in the walls. I joke about that all the time, but, like, that's why. She thinks that the prophecy is actively happening with the initial, passing of Joffrey. As I like to say, in A Song of Ice and Fire and Game of Thrones, if you mess with prophecy, you are not going to have a good result. Her actively trying to manipulate situations is what is further causing this to happen. If Tyrion or her other brother ends up offing her, it's going to be because she has created a situation in which they do not like her anymore. They hate her and now have a reason to want to do that. Anyway, tell me what you want me to talk about next in the comments. Y'all are great. Like, do all the things, and I hope you have a good night. Okay, bye. Cersei Lannister has been prophesied to be unalived by the Valonqar, or the Little Brother, which is exactly what a paranoid sociopath likes to hear. But who is the Valonqar? Is it one of the obvious choices? Is it someone else? Is it even a boy? Who the hell knows? We have lots of time to theorize, so let's go over the different theories. Okay, let's start off with the obvious choice, and the one that Cersei even thinks, which is Tyrion. Cersei has always thought that Tyrion is the Valonqar, probably because she cannot imagine a world in which Jaime, her other little brother, doesn't like her anymore and wants to, but what are you gonna do? So she thinks it's Tyrion, and honestly, like, I wouldn't be totally upset if it actually was Tyrion, because Cersei has given him lots and lots of reasons his entire life to want to, do the, so there you go. Up next, we have Jaime. Now, Jaime is a popular choice in the fandom because of the dramatic irony of it all. Her entire life, Cersei has gone, it's Tyrion, of course it's Tyrion, because he's a monster, and he took out my mother coming into the world, and now he wants to take out me, ooh, whatever. And Jaime is the love of my life. Jaime would never hurt me. Jaime's always here when I ask him to, because he's not very smart, and I'm very smart, and I have, manipulated him into always listening to me, yada, yada, yada. So yeah, if Jaime were to, turn around and be like, Like, I get it. Good irony there. Now, if I were to put money on it, I think the safest bet is Jaime, for the aforementioned dramatic irony, and just because, like, narratively, I think it makes sense. Jaime, his great shame in life, not really a shame, but how society perceives it, is the kingslaying of it all. He took out the Mad King, and we have, in the books at least, Cersei very intentionally kind of starting to emulate the Mad King, her obsession with wildfire, and just all of the torture-y, not fun stuff. And so I think it's a good, like, closing of that loop. Like, we start off Jaime's, like, descent from grace with the slaying of the Mad King, and then, you know, he kind of, like, makes up for it, taking out the next big threat, Cersei, the Mad Queen. Some people will argue that they don't think it's going to be Jaime because the prophecy for Maggy the Frog specifically says that the Valonqar, what is the phrasing? Like, choke the life out of you? Sorry, it says the Valonqar shall wrap his hands about your pale white throat and choke the life from you. Same death. But anyway, people think that, you know, because it specifies that it's going to be a choking, you know, Jaime, do we see the hand? We don't see the hand. Cool. He has a gold hand, so he's missing a hand, so the choking might be difficult, so they think it's not Jaime. I say, it's metaphors, you know? Or maybe he finds another way to choke her. I don't know, man. The point is, it's probably Jaime, but let's talk about the others. Another popular choice is Tommen. Tommen is another one that I think would be very interesting, and again, ironic. Tommen is the youngest child of Cersei and Jaime. He is the little brother. And again, with the dramatic irony, like Cersei her whole life thinking, of course, it's going to be Tyrion, the brother who is, in her mind, like the stereotype of evil and unnatural and not good, you know, because she's ableist. But oh no, it's one of her precious children that she doesn't actually, like, super care about in the context of them being individuals, but only as extensions of her. And what if, you know, that that mistreatment and that disconnect comes back to bite her in the butt when Tommen goes all, you know, you get it? This is a chaotic video. What's happening tonight? But yeah, maybe Cersei tries to make him eat his beets and he loses it and he's like, mom, no more, ooh. Tommen cannot abide beets. Next, we got a kind of a random one. We have the Hound. So Sandor Clegane is technically a little brother because Gregor Clegane, the Mountain, is his older brother. And I think this theory plays into people hoping that Clegane Bowl will happen in the books. Clegane Bowl being, you know, the two Cleganes going at it, which we got in the show in a very confusing and unsatisfying matter, but I won't go into that. But yeah, so if Robert Strong, who is, you know, the reanimated Mountain most likely, is the reanimated Mountain, then maybe Sandor is like, yeah, I want to go take him out. And so he goes, because Cersei has to have her trial by combat still. Maybe, I don't know, actually, well, no, the show is the one that outlawed that. But in the context of the books, trial by combat is still a thing. So if that's happening, maybe Sandor is like, I'll be the other champion for, like, the faith, because he's most likely the gravedigger right now, and probably, you know, like one of the Silent Brothers, and so he's gone a little religious light, I don't know. But yeah, so I think this is just like a setup for Clegane Bowl in this theory, and then they fight each other, and then for some reason, after he has taken out his zombie brother, the Mountain, he then turns to Cersei and is like, choke. I don't know. Do with that information what you will. Up next, we have another kind of subversive popular choice in the fandom, and that's Rickon. Rickon Stark, the littlest brother who is probably turning feral off in the wilderness somewhere with his direwolf. It's fine, he's happier that way. So with this particular theory, I'm going to be honest, I'm going to say that I think the majority of the people that subscribe to this theory are trying to, like, find a purpose for Rickon within the story. Because right now, we don't really know, like, where Rickon is, what Rickon's doing, what he will eventually do, etc., because he's off just in the wilderness somewhere, you know, and Davos is going to go find him. And I think people, like, assume that he has, like, some kind of a role to play because there's that anecdote from early in the show where the showrunners thought that there were too many children, and so they wanted to take out Rickon because he was the youngest. They're like, it'll be cleaner if he's just not there, and George, like, tried to veto it. Well, he doesn't have veto power, but he very strongly suggested, like, hey, don't do that. I have big plans for Rickon. And the showrunners, at least initially, were like, okay, cool. Eventually, they, you know, took him out very unceremoniously with the zigzagging controversy of it all. So whatever George's plans were, they either didn't care, or they ignored it, or I don't know. But because of that initial statement and that anecdote coming out, a lot of people are like, okay, so Rickon has something to do with the story. There is a task that he's going to have. And because he's a little brother, we have to, like, throw him in the mix for Cersei as well. I wouldn't be mad. Like, sure, why not? Like, go feral child. Go take out that mean queen. Well, yeah. And then finally, of course, we have Arya. Now, Arya's proposal as being the Valonqar comes with an interpretation of the theory that because we know that some words in High Valyrian are gender neutral, perhaps Valonqar is as well. Now, we do not know this for certain. We do not have any more context to this. We do know that Maester Aemon says that there is a translation error in the Prince Who Was Promised prophecy because they labeled the word prince as gendered male, but it could be either male or female. Now, we don't know that necessarily applies to Valonqar. We don't have additional information. I know people like to theorize and pontificate and be like, oh, for certain. You're wrong. You don't have more information than me. I'm sorry. But if we entertain that notion, then it doesn't have to necessarily be little brother. It could be little sibling, in which case Arya seems primely set up to take out Cersei. Cersei is on Arya's list. Arya has been, training to do all the assassin stuff. It makes lots of sense. There's a very popular theory in the fandom, which I don't particularly care for, that it is going to be Jaime who is, taking out Cersei, but it's actually Arya wearing Jaime's face. And ooh, I don't really like that because I think narratively it doesn't, it doesn't make a lot of sense, but whatever, people like it. Now, once again, I think that most likely it's probably Jaime, but I think a lot of these possibilities are very fun. Please tell me what theories you want me to talk about next. Y'all are cool. Okay, bye. Fun fact, Cersei Lannister murdered the Pope once. Okay, not the actual Pope, but the Westeros equivalent of the Pope, the Pope but medieval fantasy. That she took him out. And if you're going duh, yeah, we saw the show, blah, blah. No, I'm not talking about that. I'm not talking about the Vatican going kablooey. That, as of right now, has not happened in the books. But what has happened is Cersei took out a Pope that displeased her. And by Pope, I mean High Septon. That is what, the Pope equivalent in Westeros is. So we actually go through several High Septons over the course of the series. You have the first one, who's the High Septon at the beginning of the series, who meets an unfortunate end in Book 2, Clash of Kings, when Joffrey and a lot of the royals, Tyrion, Sansa, Cersei, are having a little processional through the city, and then there's a riot as they're making their way back to the castle. You'll remember that from the TV show. But during the riot, the crowd is trying to get out all the rich royal people, and the High Septon is amongst them, and he is less lucky than the other people there. Most of the other royals get shepherded away, but the High Septon gets pulled down by the crowd and literally just torn apart. And also his pretty crystal crown on top of his head, that gets ripped apart too by the hungry masses all looking for some coin. Which, I get it. I'm very close to that point myself. Anyway, one High Septon down. And at that point, Tyrion is still the acting hand of the king. So he decides, I'm going to put in my own High Septon. A High Septon who, will listen to me. So this will be helpful in the future. And so he puts in, a dude who's just, kind of listens to him. And he's like, great. I have a guy in good with the church. But fast forward a couple of books, Tyrion no longer the hand of the king, Tywin, he's had a whoopsie on a toilet, and now King's Landing has kind of fallen under the control of Miss Cersei Lannister over here. Because Cersei is in her paranoid era, she goes oh my god, I can't trust this High Septon. He's Tyrion's, and Tyrion's in the walls. So Tyrion in the walls is telling the High Septon what to do. We need to make sure the High Septon can't do anything anymore. We need him gone. I need him gone. I don't trust this Pope. So one of the scores of men that she is currently fucking, she convinces him to go, sorry, it's just so stupid. Cersei is really stupid in that book. She convinces him to go to the Vatican and murder the Pope in his sleep. And because this guy is real dumb, because, Cersei knows how to pick him, but he's yeah, no, you want it, hot lady, I'm gonna do it. So he goes and he does it, and it's a whole thing. And it's after that one is murdered that we then have the situation in which we need a new High Septon, and that's how the High Sparrow gets into power. But yeah, never forget that Cersei murdered a pope because she was paranoid. There was nothing legitimate. There wasn't some secret scheme. She was just oh, Tyrion picked you, so you must die now. Oh, Cersei. Anyway, tell me in the comments, what crazy ass Cersei thing do you want me to talk about next? Because, I need ideas. I'm tired. I got a week before I graduate here. Okay, good night. Joffrey Baratheon has no friends besides his mother Cersei, and that is why he is a monster. In other news, the sky is blue. I can already hear a bunch of you click-clacking away in the comments being like, well, yeah, because he's an incest baby, and so, like, that's why he's crazy, and blah, blah, blah. Yeah, okay, yeah, we've heard it. But I'd like to have a slightly more nuanced conversation about Joffrey and his behavior and what I think are the actual roots of it beyond the, like, oh, incest baby equals crazy argument. Because time and time again, I think that argument overly simplifies some of the actual issues that are going on here. Like, yes, does Joffrey have some antisocial behaviors that you can detect in just, his general demeanor? Absolutely. And while there's probably a genetic component to that, automatically assigning it to the incest, I don't know. I think it's just slightly disingenuous because the incest has been a problem for thousands of years, and not just in the Targaryens, in the Lannisters too. Because remember, the Lannisters, they like to practice the regular medieval incest, if you will. I'm saying that word too much. This video isn't going to do well. But they did it in the traditional European way, where you marry your cousins over and over and over again. Tywin and his wife Joanna, their last names were both Lannister before they were married because they're cousins. So sure, the incest might be causing problems and might be even related to the antisocial behavior, in a way that it's not just its own thing that's popping up. Maybe it is popping up specifically because of the intermarrying, but then that's going to be a problem for everyone. That isn't a special, unique problem to the Lannister or the Targaryens or whatever. They're all dealing with it. Anyway, I'm getting sidetracked. Joffrey has no friends. So yes, we do see that Joffrey seems to have had some antisocial behaviors, inclinations from the time he was young, hurting the small animals. He has an unfortunate episode when he's very, very young with a cat that he does some experimenting on and then tries to show his father Robert, and Robert, just smacks him across the room because he's like, the fuck? Which, don't hit your kid. That's bad. Obviously that's bad, but also the autopsy, no. And so you combine this unfortunate behavior with the fact that Joffrey never seems to have developed any friends of his own. In A Feast for Crows, Cersei blatantly remembers that Joffrey never had any boys, girls, whatever, friends his own age that he spent any time with. He was always alone. He was always keeping to himself. The implication then being that the only people that he really got to socialize with were Cersei, and then later on the Hound when, he was assigned to do so. And I think it's here that we really get the root of why Joffrey is as bad as he is, in a way that is different from a lot of the other characters, and even his siblings and stuff. Because remember, his siblings are chill. They're normal kids. They're kind of, quiet and young and yappy and stuff, but that's just kid stuff. They're not cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs over here, okay? But I'd argue that the reason that they're chill in a way that Joffrey isn't is that Joffrey was isolated by his own, funny behavior, we'll call it, and then in that isolation, his only, source of comfort, reassurance, and socialization was Cersei Lannister, who, well, is a piece of work herself. Something I do appreciate about the TV show is they do give us a couple of scenes of just Cersei and Joffrey to kind of establish the sort of twisted nature of that relationship, where Joffrey is this very insecure human being, this, young child who wants to control everything and doesn't understand why the world isn't behaving the way he wants it to. And then you have Cersei, who is reinforcing this idea to him that the world should respond how he wants to because he's entitled to it, because he is the king, he is the prince, he is everything. The world belongs to him. And I think that was a very smart thing on the part of the show to really show us that insecurity as the root of his behavior, and how he's basically being poisoned by his mother's words. He's being told the wrong thing, he's having the wrong thing reinforced, and then he's turning around and using that to just unleash cruelty on the world. Now, while we don't see that specifically in the books, because Joffrey is never a POV character and Cersei isn't a POV character until after he's gone, we do, I think, get hints of it in the little interactions that we see with them. We do see Joffrey constantly looking to his mother for reassurance when things are are going wrong. Like, a case in point, when Joffrey is first, made king after his father, Robert dies, when Ned tries to, argue against that, he's looking to Cersei. Joffrey's looking to Cersei, being like, Mommy, what's going on here? And so you get that sense that, like, Cersei is the one who has shaped his entire worldview because he's never had anyone else to influence him. Robert is as good as not there because he wants to go and party and be the party king of fucking college town Westeros, whatever. He has no interest really in his children, and any interest that he might have had was probably squashed when this little psychopath brought him a dead cat. So without any other friends of his own, again, the only people shaping his worldview are Cersei, who is, just poisoning him with all these ideas of entitlement and privilege, and also her own paranoia. Because remember, Cersei in the books is a lot more paranoid than the Cersei of the TV show. So all that paranoia is getting, poured into Joffrey. And the only other individual that he spends an extended amount of time with is the Hound, his personal guard, who he gets to order around. There is never anyone, like, on his level. There's never a literal, like, friend of his same age, gender, lived experience, anything, who he can, like, have, like, a push and pull with, who he can have an exchange of ideas with, who he can, like, learn how to socialize with. So while I do think that there is a degree of that, like, antisocial behavior, coming from when he's young and the animals and all that, I do think it is, at the very least, made 100 times worse by the fact that he is never, like, socialized around anyone besides the paranoia queen and our dark hound. So this is one of the reasons why I get a little frustrated when everyone just wants to blame everything on the incest of it all, because I think it's a little deeper than that. I think that this is just literal, like, childhood, like, neglect in the upbringing. Joffrey has been neglected mentally by the way that his mother has raised him. I think that idea is supported in universe by people who blame who blame his mother's upbringing for his later behavior, more so than the circumstances of his birth. In A Feast for Crows, when Cersei is asking Kevin Lannister, her uncle, Tywin's brother, to be the next hand of the king, thinking that, oh, he'll be a very good lieutenant, he'll listen to me, I'll get to push him around, Kevin lays down some rules for her if he's to take the position. And the first one is that he wants her to get away from Tommen, who is now the new king. And he explicitly says, like, I will do this position, I'll do all the work, I'll do everything, but you need to leave. You need to go to Casterly Rock, and you need to leave Tommen here with the rest of us, so that he's raised by anyone other than you, because we've seen what happens when you raise a future king. And I'm sorry, but Kevin Lannister is one of the smartest characters in this series for a reason. He sees things. He's that quiet person that doesn't say a lot, but when he does, he's been paying attention. He not so subtly indicates that he understands the nature of the children's origin or their parentage, and then also at the same time, even with that in mind, also points out that the way Joffrey was the way he was is because of this woman right here. And so if Tommen is to have any chance at all, Tommen needs to be raised away from her. He needs to not have that influence. He needs to be raised around other children his own age. He needs to, like, be socialized, and he needs to not have this paranoia and entitlement and privilege poured into him. Because otherwise, you get this psychopath over here. Anyway, please let me know what you want me to talk about next. Leave it in the comments here. Like all the buttons, do all the things. Y'all are very cool. I don't know. Should I shave my head? I've been thinking about that. What do we think? Does that scream like I'm having, like, an existential crisis? I don't know. Maybe I'll leave it. Who knows? Anyway, good night. Tyrion Lannister's relationship with his siblings is about as different as most siblings' relationships are different than Jaime and Cersei's, i.e. please don't do your sibling. But I think there are some very interesting factors that play into the reasoning why Tyrion's relationship with Jaime and Cersei develops so differently. Because I'll say up until, the end of Storm of Swords, Jaime and Tyrion are relatively close and get along relatively really well. Like, I should stop saying relatively. They get along well. They're close even if they don't see each other. When we are in either of their POVs, they think about that sibling fondly. It seems to be a very sweet relationship. As opposed, of course, to the Cersei-Tyrion relationship, which is bad, not good. Some might say horrifically unhealthy. I say it's bad. But as I teased earlier, I think you can kind of track the trend of the relationships from a relatively early age, and then mark as they continue to either deteriorate or strengthen as time goes on. So let's get the first factor out of the way. There is the passing of Joanna Lannister, their mother. Joanna Lannister passes away in childbirth, bringing Tyrion into the world. It obviously is very sad, and it leaves the family basically broken at this point. Because remember, Joanna seems to have been like the only positive stabilizing force in the family. She kept Tywin happy. She had a decent relationship with the children, enough so that at least we can surmise that like they were traumatized by her loss. Cersei, ruminates on the fact that she doesn't have that relationship with her mother because it was taken from her. You have Jaime, who later is dreaming about his mother. There's a definite loss there. And then from Tywin's perspective that, well, she was the only person that had ever made him smile. Healthy. So we have this first factor, this first defining factor, and that is that Tyrion enters the world, and his entrance into the world is in conjunction with his mother's unfortunate exit. And how do the twins react? Well, differently. Cersei, who's the world champion grudge holder of all time, an undefeated champion, she goes, I hate you for life, I hope you get plague, I never liked you, I want to hurt you at every possible moment that I can, boo. Also, all of this is to a baby, no, don't forget. This is a very similar position to what Tywin will take, basically blaming Tyrion for the loss of Joanna. Now, funnily enough, it seems like Jaime has the sane response of being like, well, Tyrion didn't do it. A child doesn't do that. They don't just off their mother. This is a whoops. So no, Jaime doesn't end up developing this weird illogical hatred of his sibling because his mother passed away. He's like, oh, well, my sibling is a little awkward. He's got some issues, but he's a sweet kid. So he develops a soft spot for Tyrion, and that, starts to lead him in a very different direction than from Cersei. And so with these dueling perspectives, the first 3 years of Tyrion's life, which obviously he's not going to remember very much, kind of revolve around this dynamic of Cersei wanting to hurt him and Jaime stopping her. We get a taste for that in the memory that Oberyn Martell shares when they went to Casterly Rock, where they wanted to see the monster that Cersei, kept talking about. And when they went to go show Tyrion to him, he's like, that's just a kid. I don't know what you're talking about. And then Cersei starts trying to, hurt the baby, twisting parts of him that don't like to be twisted. And she only stops when Jaime stops her. So we can assume first 3 years of his life, that's kind of the dynamic. There's Jaime kind of trying to look out for this kid, and Cersei just on the rage quest. Things change, however, at the end of that 3rd year. The twins, they turn 10, and they both have life-altering events. Jaime is finally sent away from Casterly Rock to go be a squire. He's getting to engage in the knightly masculine privileges that are given to people in the realm, while Cersei isn't. Cersei gets to sit at the rock and learn girl things, which Cersei has a whole relationship with femininity that is fascinating, and it can be its own multi-part series if anyone ever wants that. But just to simplify, she doesn't enjoy herself. And so I think the separation from Tyrion on Jaime's part kind of does one big thing in that it keeps that relationship kind of at arm's length so that when they do see each other, it becomes special. So Jaime does visit occasionally, and when he does, that becomes a treat. That becomes a treat for those two siblings, in my opinion. But Cersei's always there. Cersei's always there. She's not too pleased. She's just, pissy. And then, at the same time, when Jaime gets sent away to become a squire, Cersei, with her friend Melara, goes and visits Maggy the Frog and gets the prophecy of the Valonqar. That is the prophecy, of course, that the Valonqar, which means little brother in High Valyrian, will unalive Cersei. And Cersei's like, wow, already you took out my mother, now you want to take out me and my children? I hate you. I'm gonna get you first. And so the trauma continues. So Cersei now has like no reason to like Tyrion, no reason to like him at all. He is the monster that took out her mother. He is the monster who has been now prophesized to take her out and her family and her dreams, and she's just gonna have none of it. She doesn't have to see him all the time. It's at this time that they're kind of like, I think they like move to King's Landing where Tywin takes her there for a little while, and then they go back to the Rock. So there's like some back and forth. So she's not seeing Tyrion consistently, in the same way, ironically, that Jaime is. But when Jaime does see Tyrion, he tries to make it like a special thing. Unfortunately, that doesn't always turn out super well, like in the case of when Jaime basically was involved with the whole Tysha situation, Tyrion's first wife. That happened when Tyrion was 13. It was a whole to-do, but I think that's an example of, like, Jaime being there for him in a way that, like, Cersei would never have been involved. So by the time that we get to the present day, we have these two very established dynamics. Jaime is like the long-lost brother who shows up every so often, doesn't have a care in the world, they have like a jolly good time, and they depart on good terms. And then Cersei is the sibling who Tyrion just occasionally has to like live with for long stretches at a time. And it's not enjoyable. They don't like each other. It's bad. Jaime gets to be the cool older brother who like shows up, like brings you a toy, takes you to the movies, that you go and like you have like a crazy night out, and then he like drops you off at home and says, hey, yeah, I'll see you in a few months, kid, and like bebops out of there. Versus Cersei, who's just like always present, always annoyed, and always like anytime Tyrion is around, she's angry. And so Tyrion, for better or worse, like is very aware of this, and lives his life accordingly, sometimes poking fun at her, sometimes ignoring her. It doesn't help the relationship at all, either way. All this to say, I think there are a lot of very interesting similarities between Tyrion's kind of entrance and the way he maintains his presence in each of their lives. They like contrast each other, but a lot of the times like Tyrion shows up in like the same position and then they just react differently to him. And then because of that, they go further and further down these like divergent roads. And we can see how divergent they are because when Tyrion feels like he's been betrayed by each of his siblings, he reacts very differently to it. When he thinks Cersei's betray him, which he thinks she's done, multiple times, he's never shocked. He's never even particularly angry about it because he's just like, oh, well, this is just something I have to deal with because that's what I expect from her. But when he gets a big thing, when he hears from Jaime that Jaime was involved in a particular cover-up with his first wife, well, that is the ultimate betrayal because this is the one person who he would never expect to be betrayed by. And I think it's that difference, that Tyrion's reaction to those betrayals, that really show just like how oceans apart those two relationships are. Anyway, good night, y'all. Bye. Cersei Lannister is a queer woman in the A Song of Ice and Fire books, a fact that is fully cut from Game of Thrones, the TV show, but at the end of the day, the fact that it was cut is probably for the best, because when I think about it, there is no way that these chucklefucks would have had any idea of how to adapt this complex storyline involving sexuality, gender, abuse, trauma, and working through it in, well, not the healthiest manner. Ooh, careful now. I hear a few of you starting to click-clack in the comments before I've gotten to say much of anything on the subject. So, before you trot out your well-trained response of like, well, actually, she's not queer, and oh, she's not bi, or oh, she's not this, because X, Y, and Z, how about we assume that maybe I, as a creator in this space, have probably heard the explanation or argument that you're about to make, and let's just like pause it, and let me give you my explanation first, and then if you still feel like it at the end, please tell me the thing that I've heard 1,000 times. I love when that happens. So the thing to understand about Cersei is she is a character who is defined by her relationship to her gender assigned at birth. Cersei Lannister has always been dissatisfied with the fact that she is a woman. Now, that's not necessarily to say that like she is for sure like angry at her body, at her like physical presentation, but it's more in line of like what society has prescribed for her as a woman, how to act, what is within her power, what is within her ability, etc. And she's unfortunately always been aware of this because of the fact that she is a twin. She's a twin who has a twin brother. So literally from the moment of birth, from the moment of consciousness, she has had to deal with the fact that like she is watching in real time as someone who is her exact age and, you know, aptitude is being treated differently based solely on the different genders that they have been assigned. And Cersei is pissed about it. She does not like the difference, and she notices it right away. She really envies and kind of resents Jaime at times for the way that he is able to have a freedom that she isn't. And I would argue that this is probably the impetus for some of the toxicity in that relationship, because when she does get him to kind of do what she wants him to do from time to time, it's almost as if like it's a correction of like what society has taken from her. So she's like trying to like almost like flip the narrative and like take more power from this person that society has deemed to like get more power generally. Again, it's not healthy, it's not great, but like she's figuring shit out. But as the years progress, of course, these societal norms, these difference in gender and how gender is treated, push her and Jaime further and further apart. Eventually, Jaime is off squiring in places, and she's left alone with, the company of other young girls who she has never much cared for. Now, as time progresses, an interesting wrinkle enters the chat. We have the concept of marriage and the fact that Cersei keeps being promised a very high-profile marriage. So initially, it's very well known that Tywin wants to marry Cersei to Rhaegar Targaryen, therefore making her the future queen of Westeros. Cersei becomes very enamored of this idea, which makes sense because in a world where she has like constantly seen like the limits of what she can do, reaching kind of the apex of what her gender can be, a queen, seems like, you know, a pretty good deal considering all things. Being in a position where like she can have that power that she is so frequently denied is inherently very tempting. And so that becomes a fixation and further a big hurt when Aerys Targaryen rejects Tywin's bid and Cersei is basically told like, ew, yeah, no, you're not good enough. But hey, we have luck because rebellions happen and a rebellion is very successful, putting a new king on the throne. And well, when you want to ensure that like the powerful houses are playing nice, you get to marry Cersei Lannister. But of course, things aren't as simple as that, because yes, Cersei has now kind of achieved this goal. She has reached the apex of the amount of power that she can have as a queen, and then realizes that there are still limits on that because her husband is now the king. And this king can and will do whatever he wants with her. And he does. Robert, canonically, is very abusive to Cersei. He hits her, he assaults her, both like physically and sexually, and it's horrifying. Like, she has literally no autonomy because within the confines of marriage, she is the wife and she just has to deal with it. And then on top of all of that, it's a king and queen. So even if she like were to like try to get help, she is the one person who, like, these Kingsguard or whatever, they can't help her against her husband. Not dissimilar from the previous monarch, Aerys the Mad King, and Rhaella, his wife, who he would constantly abuse. So Cersei, even in this position of immense power, is still trapped within the confines of this gender that she absolutely resents. And so eventually, you know, when Robert is out of the picture, she starts to try to flex her muscles a little bit. She struggles at first because there's still Tyrion to deal with initially when he's Hand of the King, and then Tywin when he becomes Hand of the King again, all like still putting those constraints on her, still trying to tell her what to do, as she like gets more and more frustrated that like no matter who she kind of gets out of the way, there's always another man there to be able to like subdue what should be kind of like unlimited power, considering she's the fucking queen. But finally, in Feast for Crows, she gets her wish. All the guys are dead. She's literally in charge, and boy, is it sad to watch. Because like a lot of people or kids or whatever who are repressed, who have like things taken away from them in extreme situations, the second they are able to indulge, they overindulge. They don't do so responsibly, you know? I live in Utah, and if you ever seen an ex-Mormon start to drink, like, dear God, it's like, no, sip. You don't need to do 12 shots. Not necessary. I get it. It's new. You weren't allowed before, and you're allowed now, and so you're, like, trying stuff, but, like, let's do so responsibly, please. That's Cersei Lannister. But what becomes very interesting about this is like now that she is, unbound, she's unrepressed, she can kind of do whatever she wants. We find Cersei kind of starting to experiment with power, and then not only with power, but with like gender specifically and sexuality. So over the course of A Feast for Crows, Cersei develops a relationship with a lady named Taena of Myr, or Taena Merryweather. She is from Myr, but she has married a like Westerosi lord, and she is one of the like ladies in waiting for Margaery Tyrell. Now, Cersei, because she thinks she's so smart, thinks that she's like stealing Taena to kind of like be a spy for her, not realizing that, she thinks that like Taena might also be spying like on Cersei for Margaery, but Cersei thinks that she can manage it. That she's like, ooh, I'll just like feed Margaery like false things, and then like I'll get Taena on my side, yada yada. Now, this relationship develops in a very interesting and kind of uncomfortable way. And that's because whether she's initially realizing it or not, Cersei is turning into Robert Baratheon almost. This like Robert Baratheon led this like life of excess in which he just did whatever he wanted, and it, eventually didn't work out for him. And Cersei, in her like quest to experience this newfound like unbound power, is starting to do the same thing and starting to kind of turn to him. And at the times that she like notices it, she kind of embraces it, which leads to one of the most uncomfortable sex scenes in the A Song of Ice and Fire book series, in my opinion. And it's a queer sex scene with Taena and Cersei. So Taena is acting as like a bed warmer for Cersei. That's like a very common thing where like someone like shares your bed so you like stay warm at night. And in the midst of it, because they are naked, Cersei wants to experiment and basically see like what would it be like to feel like Robert Baratheon? Because Robert would at times basically force himself into her bedroom and decide that they were going to have sex then, whether she wanted to or not. And so she wants to feel what that power feels like. And so her and Taena engage in this very rough sex scene where Cersei is in charge, but is being like too rough, is being like hurtful to the point where like Taena is in pain for parts of it. Now Cersei eventually like ends it and doesn't like get much like physically out of it. She doesn't like being within that like role that Robert has. She didn't like taking her pleasure, as she like calls it, in the way that he did. It just didn't do anything for her. And a lot of people like to use that as an excuse to say that like Cersei isn't actually queer, despite the fact that she's like exploring her sexuality with a woman. And that's dumb, frankly, because you're ignoring the greater context of what was going on in that scene, and that is that she was essentially cosplaying as Robert. And it's specifically her inhabiting that specific role that she did not like. And so it isn't so clear-cut of a situation that we can make a judgment call of like whether she is bisexual or not, because there were so many other layers to that encounter that have to be unpacked and haven't been yet. But from what we do know, she didn't send Taena away in disgust. She continues to sleep in the same bed with her. And while we don't know whether they engaged in sex again, we do know that the thing that Cersei did decide is that I don't like being like Robert. I don't like being in the abusive role. Thank you everyone for watching, and I hope you have a good night. Goodbye. Westeros gets absolutely wrecked by Robert's rebellion, but does Robert's rebellion even happen if Cersei marries Rhaegar as Tywin originally intended? And when I stop and think about it, no, I don't think it does. The marriage that might have potentially saved the realm might be Cersei and Rhaegar Targaryen, who'da thunk? Now, before you start arguing in the comments, let me explain my thought process here. So let's first look at what actually happened. So what actually happened is Tywin wanted Cersei to marry Rhaegar. And at first this seemed like, not a huge stretch. Aerys and Tywin were originally pretty close friends. Tywin is handed the king to Aerys, and so again, this seems plausible. But then their friendship starts to fray. Tywin and Aerys aren't getting along as much. Tywin does a really good job as Aerys' hand of the king, and Aerys starts to feel like credit is being overly given to Tywin instead of him, the king, and he gets all jelly about that. So eventually when Tywin brings it up once again, like openly and like, asks like, hey, can we confirm this? Aerys is like, absolutely not. It would be ridiculous for me to marry off my son to the child of my servant. That would be messed up.
And of course, Tywin took that super well. It didn't affect him at all. It didn't stay with him and haunt his every dream moment, whatever. Yeah, Tywin was fucking pissed. Then, not so shockingly, just a year or two later, Aerys goes through the most traumatic event of his life that, leaves him fully, fucked up. And that is, of course, the Defiance of Duskendale. So, the Defiance of Duskendale is when Aerys basically gets kidnapped by the Lord Darkland. Lord Darkland of Duskendale. Because Duskendale, once upon a time, before Aegon's conquest, they thought that they were something. And so they wanted to have, more rights like Dorne does. And, everyone else is like, haha, sorry, no one gets rights but Dorne. Because, Dorne is special. But Darkland is like, hey, okay, fine. But what if I kidnap the king? And thus starts a 6-month siege of Duskendale in which Aerys is being held captive and tortured. And this is what eventually leads to him going full crazy. Because he'd always been kind of a dick, but he wasn't cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. But then, Duskendale happens, and then afterwards he's loco. He's crazy bananas. He's off his rocker. But the reason that he stays stuck in Duskendale for 6 months enduring this torture is because Tywin is just in charge, and Tywin isn't doing a ton to get him out. Now, if you were to ask Tywin at the time, oh, what are you doing? He's like, oh, well, I'm laying siege, and we don't want to send anyone in because that risks the life of the king, so we're just gonna play this by ear, take the safe route. And the safe route, of course, leaves Aerys imprisoned, in dungeons. Now, I think it's pretty easy to, connect the dots and be like, yeah, Tywin was, leaving Aerys in Duskendale, hoping that, basically either he gets kind of back at him for all the bullshit that he's put him through, including the slight with Cersei, or best case scenario, if he can leave it long enough without making it look bad, Aerys might die and then he gets to be regent to Rhaegar. Actually, I think by Defiance of Duskendale, Rhaegar is probably about 18, so Tywin wouldn't be his regent, but an 18-year-old king, without a lot of experience, is probably a lot more malleable than, crazy, or not so crazy, but dickish Aerys over there. Anyway, of course, Aerys would eventually get rescued by Barristan Selmy, but by then, he's fully gone crazy. He now has this obsession with, torture and fire and all this shit, and that would eventually lead to the events of Robert's Rebellion, where, Rhaegar pulls the shit with Lyanna, and then the Stark bros, not the Stark bros, but just the singular, Brandon Stark goes down to King's Landing to demand an audience with Rhaegar. Aerys goes crazy, eventually starts wanting lots of heads, and then Robert's Rebellion happens, yada, yada, yada. But, to my point, if Rhaegar marries Cersei, does any of that happen? I don't think so. And that's whether or not Aerys goes crazy. Because the first and easiest argument is, I think if Rhaegar marries Cersei, then Tywin never leaves, probably never leaves Aerys in Duskendale for that long. So there is the potential that Aerys never goes crazy, or at least, the craziness is delayed. And honestly, I think in either scenario, it doesn't matter almost, because say Aerys doesn't go crazy, then Tywin goes on dealing with him for as long as he, I guess, wants to, because he's now very invested in the future of the Targaryen line, which Cersei has now married into. So either Aerys plays ball with him, whether he's cuckoo or not, or I assume Tywin at any point decides when it's best to maybe take him out and then install Rhaegar, and then Cersei is now queen. And for anyone who's going to argue that oh, Tywin's too smart or whatever to attempt to do something crazy like that, and I would say no, he's not. Tywin is blinded by ambition pretty often, and often goes for the most ruthless approach. And yeah, I think he would be smart enough not to do it in the open, but I don't think he would have any problem with people perceiving him as the true power behind the throne and knowing what he's capable of. And at that point, depending on when he takes Aerys out, he's still gonna be that hand of the king, probably mentor figure for a very young Rhaegar, who at this point, is probably been fully brought into the Lannister corner by Cersei. So either Aerys, goes cuckoo and Tywin has no problem kind of taking him out because the actual person that he wants to be king gets to be king next, in this case Rhaegar, because then Cersei gets to be queen, or he doesn't go crazy but he stays a dick, in which case I think he still basically offs him if it ever is more fortuitous for him to do so. Again, my point is, like, Tywin uses people to like fulfill his own ambitions, and if he has set his sights on Cersei becoming queen and his like offspring being the future of House or like his descendants being the future of House Targaryen, then that's going to be where his energy lies. He's not going to have an issue dealing with Aerys, because he's already shown us that he is willing to put Aerys in danger and keep him there. And so with the threat of like Aerys going crazy and or just continue to rule kind of neutralized with Tywin having this like extended like vice grip over the Targaryen line, I don't think we ever see a Robert's Rebellion, because we don't ever, I think, get to the point where Aerys is out of control enough to instigate it without Tywin cleaning up his mess. Because also remember, Tywin quits being Hand of the King shortly before Robert's Rebellion takes place, because Robert's Rebellion, the seeds of it get planted at that tourney at Harrenhal, and that's where Jaime Lannister gets inducted into the Kingsguard expressly against Tywin's wishes, and that's when Tywin is like fully done with Aerys. So if Tywin never removes himself from the equation, I don't think Robert's Rebellion is ever allowed to get to that point, because in a way Tywin enables it by sitting on his hands and letting like everything go wild. Anyway, I actually really enjoyed this What If. Thank you to my mutual Morgan over here. This was a good one that I feel like we can base in like known facts, and it's not just like me pulling out like a random scenario out of my ass based on nothing. But anyway, if you guys have any other What Ifs that you want me to go through or like try to think of, please drop them in the comments. I hope everyone has a great night, and yeah, bye-bye.